Bonjour à tous. Donc je suis Alex Bernier, je suis directeur de l'association Braille, une organisation en France qui s'occupe d'accessibilité numérique. On travaille notamment sur l'accessibilité des sites web, sur l'accessibilité du livre numérique et sur en général des projets de recherche et développement qui visent à améliorer l'accès au numérique pour les personnes handicapées. C'est mieux comme ça. Ok. Cette présentation a plusieurs.
So this presentation has a few different aims.
Pour but de présenter quelques
It
catégories
will
d'utilisateurs
present some of the user categories that benefit
techniques qu'on va mettre en œuvre
from the techniques that we implement in the accessibility framework. So to give you an overview of the different types of handicap that have specific needs, and also giving you some examples of these needs that they may have, and then defining
dans la chaîne de production de
and we're in the content production chain and in the formats and how we can fulfill these needs. So the presentation of these different categories, and it's not aimed to be an exhaustive list, but it's to give you an idea of to give you an idea of the people that need this special accessibility, and to give you some demonstrations, a more concrete demonstration and view. You can come to the workshop that is taking place later on this afternoon on this theme of accessibility. So the first category that I'm presenting to you today is low vision individuals, so they can see but not well, and so they are able to read a book, for example, but they have special needs. So, for example, they need specific functions that allow them to increase text size, for example. And for other people, it can be a question for people who are colorblind, for example, or other types of vision impedance. So they will require other functions that allow them, for example, to change the color of fonts of text to assist them in distinguishing colors that they have difficulty in differentiating between under normal circumstances, and also change the colors to be able to enhance the contrast on the screen. Other possibilities to improve reading conditions for these populations is to change the type of font that is used. Some fonts are harder to read than others for people with limited vision, and therefore they will use applications that will allow them to change the font. And other possibilities are to provide audiobooks that also allow them to access the content more easily if they have a difficulty reading. The second population that has special access needs are people who are dyslexic. So these people will have difficulty, for example, reading a book with books because they will invert characters. They confuse B's and D's, for example, or B's and Q's, and we can therefore offer mechanisms, and notably with synchronization of the text from the book and an audio version that's pronounced by a computer voice, and this will facilitate their reading and understanding. So when the audio version is pronounced, the text is shown on the screen and is underlined as it's spoken. So it's and that is simultaneous, and therefore this will facilitate their understanding, comprehension. Dyslexic people, like people with impaired vision, also require functionalities that allow them to personalize and to change fonts. There are fonts, for example, that have been specifically developed. There's one, Open Dyslexia, for example, font, and there are other fonts that do this, and they provide they facilitate choosing the appropriate font. And some dyslexic people also like to have greater line spacing to facilitate reading of the text. And other dyslexics that find it easier to read a text when it's left justified.
Le fait que le texte soit justifié fait que
when a text is justified like this, the spaces between the words can vary, and this can make it difficult for them to read and understand the text.
Dernière catégorie que je vais vous présenter là, ce sont les personnes
And the last category
qui vont par exemple
is blind people,
d'une version en
and they benefit Braille versions of books, and for digital books they will consult this, they'll be able to read this with the Braille display unit. So this is what I'm using right now to be able to read the content of these slides, and you are welcome to have a look at what this looks like during the workshop. And so this is connected to a PC and also via Bluetooth to a mobile device, a phone, tablet, etc. And this makes it possible to read it in Braille dynamically. People who are blind who cannot read Braille can also access digital books through audio versions, of course, and whether it be an audio which is human narrated or whether it's text-to-speech with using text-to-speech technologies. Both are possible and exist, of course. And people that are blind Braille readers can also access content with Braille and audio, accumulate both of these techniques. Something else that's important for blind people is to have the possibility of having descriptions of pictures. Of course, blind people use screen reader software, and what this does is it sends to the screen, it will show what's on the screen, and these readers are not able to interpret or describe an image. They can detect the presence of an image, but they cannot detect the content of the image to be able to generate a description. So therefore, to resolve this type of problem, we need an image description that will vary depending on the context that the image is displayed, and also the type of audience that is listening to or reading this. For example, we don't describe a graph with the same level of precision for a student, a high school student, than you would for a doctoral mathematics student, for example. So image description needs to be very contextual, and of course depends on where it's presented, of the audience, etc. And then other changes that need to be made, and this can be the same for other categories as well that I was mentioning, but this can be also to select the content that is to be produced or restituted. So, for example, indicating when reading the book that you want to hear the page numbers, or whether you want to have footnotes or at the end of a book, for example. So in a technical book, for example, with a lot of footnotes, the user can choose that to be informed that there are footnotes, but that they can be generated only when they're requested and not automatically. So that just gives you a bit of an overview of some of the needs and some of the functions that are able to address these needs. So in terms of accessibility, and to be able to provide these functions, accessibility must be provided in numerous cases or configurations. Firstly, it's important in terms of the formatting. EPUB format does allow the production of accessible content. Why? Well, because it provides techniques to be able to separate content from the way in which that content is presented. So this does allow you to personalize, therefore, the way in which that content is presented. It could also be in a format, and that provides accessible content because it provides media overlay functions, which mean you can accumulate different content, for example, text and audio, and synchronize them. To have, for example, have a text and audio reading rather than audio and Braille for somebody who's blind, and it can be quite semantically rich as well. And this allows the structuring of a book, so to add titles, to facilitate navigation, and to say that this fragmented text is a note, this is a page number, and this will allow the user to navigate within the book and to filter the different types of content depending upon their individual requirements. So that's the format that provides this, but the format is of course a necessary condition, but not enough in itself. There are books, there are ePUB books, which are totally inaccessible for, of course, because authors, the publishers, need to produce the content which is accessible, so that they enrich and they add semantics to their texts. So to give an example, it can be the title level by putting tags around notes, etc. This is something that is not just a question of accessibility, but is also a question of best editorial practices and publishing practices. So these are principle of rules that benefit everyone, not just people with impaired vision. Next, in terms of accessibility, it's also implemented not only by publishers but also by organizations that and they are specialized in the production of adapted content of books, for example, and even when the content is natively provided as being accessible, they can still, I think, continue to have a mission to produce a complex content. So as I was saying to you previously, for example, the description of images varies depending on the context and the user that is reading this information. And so there are specialized associations in this area, and they have quite a high level of expertise in creating descriptions of this nature and creating content that is adapted to the needs of individuals and handicapped individuals. Content, therefore, that is adapted, for example, teaching materials that is adapted to blind people. And also, I'm sure we'll also need specialized producers to be able to produce Braille documents, whether it be digital or printed, of high quality. Because Braille production at the moment is something that we're not very good at automating for technical reasons. There are different steps in the production which are can't be automated at this time, and I won't go into great detail as to why, but this is to do with the nature of Braille code and notably short code, and this is the case in French, but in other languages as well. So therefore we need quite a high level of expertise in organizations that can produce this type of content. And finally, then there There's also expertise that's required for complex documents, scientific, technical documents, etc., that are very difficult to access. There's not very many of them in adapted books for the visually impaired, and this is something that's required because these are the types of books that are extremely important for in terms of professional insertion, studies. And the production of this type of this work is something that it's something R&D is taking place on this. There's quite a lot of work being done in this area. And then finally, in the last field on which it needs to be taken into account, and this is in terms of the actual applications themselves, the tools themselves that are used in order to restitute these books. So whether it be e-readers, the different applications you can find on your computers, etc., all of these applications can be made accessible. And to make application accessible, it can be a question, for example, of providing functionalities that allow the user to change the presentation and to personalize the parameters of the presentation of the content. And this could be changing the font size, as I mentioned earlier, and this modifies the presentation of the book, of course, but it also allows the user to modify the appearance of the software as well. So, for example, for the application to work properly, when you have increased font sizes on screen, that the menus still remain functional and can be read effectively. And another area, another point that needs to be taken into account by these applications is the complete implementation, or as complete as possible, implementation of standards and functions that are within these standards that do facilitate accessibility. So, for example, in iPUB, the media overlays, the possibility to have these different flows and synchronize them as well. And finally, and the last point, and arguably the most important, is interoperability between these applications and the assistive technologies. So with applications that are used by handicapped people to access information. So this could be, for example, a screen reader, the text-to-speech. These applications, so these content readers, must be able to work with these assistive technologies, so that as many users as possible are able to access this content. And for example, the talk we had this morning regarding LCP and being able to block text-to-speech, for example. This is actually this does raise questions, because all of these chains, the DRM, software developers, content producers, must think about this question in terms of the impact on accessibility when we're using these kinds of functions. So, for example, it does prevent people, for example, having text-to-speech, but we could also imagine the same function that would also prevent Braille or screen readers. So these are quite challenges and questions that do need to be addressed. So I'd like to thank you. And just to add a last point before I hand over to Danielle, we have BrailleNet has produced a white paper regarding access to knowledge and e-accessible knowledge, and this was the theme on our last forum. And in this, there's an article from Bill Bernstoff on ePUB accessibility on this. This can be read online.
Bonjour, everybody. So I'm French, but I'll be giving this talk in English, and my slides are in English as well. The slide deck will be available at the end of the day as an online HTML file, PowerPoint, PDF, everything. And my slides contain lots of interesting links that will encourage you to follow, to learn more about the various topics that we'll be talking about. So the title of my presentation is Paving the Way to Inclusive Publishing, a Journey in Digital Accessibility. So my name is Daniel Weck. I'm a software engineer. And I have been on this journey since I started working with DAISY Consortium just over 10 years ago now. For the past 2 to 3 years, I've been involved with the Readium Foundation as well. And at the end of last year, I joined forces at EDRLab. We live in an era of exciting technological progress. Assistive technologies are getting better and cheaper. This is illustrated here with a photo of the recently publicized and insightfully named, wait for it, Holy Braille research project from the University of Michigan. Now, this is a typical portable form factor, much like this tablet, with the premise of full-page Braille that renders text and tactile graphics. I believe it uses Braille actuators, pins that are made of microfluids. Anyway, another example closer to home and available right now is modern smartphones, like this one, which offer decent screen readers for the blind, out of the box, and a wide array of accessible apps too. So over time, similar evolutions occur in digital publishing, most notably thanks to technological advances in the open web platform and ePUB 3. Here's a quote by Bill McCoy, who is the executive director of the IDPF, from the recent ePUB Accessibility Summit. All digital content needs to be accessible content. Well, I can tell you this is not wishful thinking on the part of IDPF. From the very start, accessibility has been at the heart of the ePUB 3 standard. So ePUB 3 is a mainstream format, but it is designed to meet the needs of people with print disabilities. Now, ePUB 3 provides a technical foundation for born accessible digital publications. However, in order to achieve this, we need to consider a broader, more holistic view. We need good practices for content creators and production tools, guidelines for reading system implementers, specification of test cases, definition of evaluation processes, validation tools, etc. Think of this as an ePUB 3 ecosystem rather than just a format. It's the result of a collaboration between multiple stakeholders. And one of these stakeholders is the DAISY Consortium, which has been taking part in this ePUB 3 ecosystem from day one. But DAISY also has its own specialized format for digital publications, known as digital talking books, DTBs. So to better understand this synergy, let's take a look at the evolution of DAISY and ePUB. This is a timeline starting back in 1999, and the genesis of the DAISY format more or less coincided with that of ePUB, which at the time wasn't called ePUB, it was called OEBPS, sorry. Much better name, ePUB, I tell you that. Open eBook Publication Structure. And in 2005, DAISY 3 really is the last major update of the standard, which has been maintained ever since, but with no drastic change. Meanwhile, ePUB was born and 2 major revisions followed, ePUB 2 in 2007, ePUB 3 in 2011, with dot releases in between, minor increments. ePUB 3.1 is currently a work in progress, scheduled for completion by the end of the year. Marcus Gilling here will tell us more about that later this afternoon. So 2011, as you can see on the timeline here, is the beginning of the ePUB 3 era, and a moment of strategic change for the DAISY Consortium. ePUB 3 is effectively designated as the successor for the DAISY format. And accessibility becomes a first-class citizen in mainstream digital publishing for the first time. So within the DAISY community, a project called TIES is created. It means Transition to Inclusive ePUB 3 Ecosystem. And the goal of this initiative is to provide assistance to stakeholders during the migration process for content, adaptation of production workflows, for example, but also from the perspective of consumers reading system updates. Finally, libraries and publishers also need to update their technical practices, and they need some guidance on how to do this. The DAISY consortium actually continues to support the digital talking books format during this transition phase. In fact, let's take a look at some of the benefits offered by the DAISY 3 format, and then we'll look at drawbacks. The DT book XML document type supports markup with rich semantic structure. There's even Braille support. The NCX navigation syntax handles chapters, print pages, and so forth. The SMILE format makes it possible to synchronize audio playback with text document using human narration or even pre-recorded synthetic voice. There's an audio-only profile which enables a linear reading experience, linear playback with structure, paragraphs, sentences, and so forth. And that's a standard that's widely used by blind people. Now, it's important to note that the new ePUB 3 standard, at the time, was designed to cover all these functional requirements as well. In fact, ePUB 3 offers even more. Now, let's look at the drawbacks. From the end-user standpoint, rudimentary styling, no support for audio, video media, the lack of sophisticated visuals and interactions can be problematic in the long term. There's a restricted choice of reading systems and limited availability of accessible publications. This is what we tend to name, to coin as the book famine. So from the perspective of content authors and publishers, there's the extra cost of specialized technical skills compared to, say, mainstream competencies in the publishing industry. There are few production tools. It's basically a niche market which is difficult to finance. There's also the pragmatic reality with DAISY 202 audiobooks. This is the preview version just before DAISY 3, which are still supported on many legacy hardware devices, which are not easy to update, not easy as, let's say, to update an app on a smartphone. You know, if you have a hardware device with firmware on it, it's going to be a different story when it comes to supporting new formats. So it's fair to say that in the audiobook market, a drastic evolution is not really in demand. So then came the opportunity to solve these problems. When the ePUB standard for ebooks had a major evolution from version 2 to ePUB 3 as we know it today, the strategy of the IDPF was, and still is, to align ePUB with the open web platform. At the time, XHTML 1.1 was used by ePUB 2, and XHTML2 was being abandoned by W3C on the web. All efforts were being focused on HTML5, and as you probably know, CSS, CSS3, JavaScript, SVG for scalable vector graphics, and so forth. So as accessibility becomes a core value proposition in mainstream publishing, a more productive workflow is possible between mainstream services on the one hand and the specialized accessibility sector on the other hand, because of shared competencies, common technical skills in the publishing industry and on the web. So it's really critical and instrumental convergence of the two. A wider market opens for stakeholders, so business opportunities, lower production or conversion costs, but more importantly, it's always about the users, isn't it? From the perspective of end users and consumers, more content becomes available. We can and we must end the book famine. We're not there yet, but we're heading in the right direction. So, universally accessible publications would typically provide different access modalities, such as eyes for visual content, ears for auditory feedback, pre-recorded human voice or synthetic voice, text-to-speech, and fingers for tactile text and graphics. Okay, this is a simplification, but I think it gives quite a representative overview of the accessibility landscape in digital publishing. Now, content producers and publishers need practical advice on how to achieve a good degree of accessibility. So the DAISY Consortium set out to define a baseline for good practices with a guiding principle. One, to raise the bar beyond basic requirements such as content structure, linear reading order, table of contents, navigation, alternative text for images, and so forth. So raise the bar a little bit higher. But also to set realistic goals, given the current state of the ecosystem and the challenges faced by stakeholders. So besides documented good practices, the DAISY Consortium created free open source software to aid in the production of EPUB 3 content during that transition from DAISY to EPUB. Here is a screenshot of Toby. So Toby and Obi are both audio authoring tools for talking books, originally created for the DAISY standard, but now with full support for EPUB 3 media overlays, which Alex mentioned earlier on. There's also the DAISY pipeline, which is an automated conversion tool. On the reading system side, the DAISY Consortium commits development resources for the Readium software, which includes an online cloud reader, an offline Chrome extension for the Chrome web browser, and a framework for native apps. This is all open source, by the way. And all of my slides include links that you can follow to find out more about this project. By the way, the book shown in this screenshot is Accessible EPUB 3, which is available free from O'Reilly as an EPUB 3 file. So this is a strongly recommended read with lots of useful technical details for content creators. This second Readium screenshot shows the IDPF accessibility guidelines, which are also an excellent source of information for content production. This publication is available both as a regular website and as a downloadable EPUB file, which you can read offline. And this really demonstrates the convergence that I mentioned earlier on between, on the one hand, the publishing industry, and on the other hand, the open web platform. As of March this year, updated guidelines are available. This is the BISG Quick Start Guide to Accessible Publishing. I would definitely recommend this read, and it too is available as a free EPUB publication. Now, I mentioned Readium several times, but this is not the only available reading system. You can find information about other applications by using the epubtest website, which has a dedicated accessibility section. The DAISY Consortium actually contributed test cases and a methodology to evaluate the accessibility of reading systems. Again, all the links included in this slide. This is a crowdsourcing effort, in a way. Vendors are encouraged to take part by submitting test reports via the website, which contains all of the necessary step-by-step instructions. As shown in this example screenshot, Vital Source recently posted really promising scores and currently rates really high in the list in terms of accessibility support. So this is a good way to communicate about products. Yeah, be proud about your product. So the EPUB 3 ecosystem is by no means perfect. There is still plenty of work in progress. Most notably, the IDPF is developing an accessibility profile which is separate from the EPUB specifications so that it can be applied to any version of EPUB. Marcus will tell us more about this later this afternoon, but in a nutshell, this is a document that describes a mechanism to identify levels of accessibility and enables, the idea is to enable content discovery via a well-known metadata vocabulary. For example, if I'm a blind user, I really want to find and acquire content that is optimized for my needs. For example, audio publications. The goal is to allow content creators and publishers, or publishers, to make conformance claims and potentially to earn an accessibility badge, some kind of seal of approval. So ultimately, this may result in a certification process or processes, but to be fair, due to local legislation and potential legal issues, I believe the IDPF guidelines will probably remain neutral in that way to a certain extent, and the guidelines will be usable across different markets, different countries, different contexts. So EPUB 3 is based on technologies from the Open Web platform, as I said earlier on, HTML5, CSS, and so forth. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, W3C WCAG, as it's known, can be used. No need to reinvent the wheel here. However, the accessibility profile, as it's currently called, extends this conformance framework, so to speak, to address the specific needs of a publication format. For example, ePUB is a collection of multiple documents available in a linear reading order with high-level navigation, and all of that has to be defined outside of WCAG because the web simply does not define the publication structure at this stage. One word about the difference between universal and optimized. The guidelines make a difference between universal accessibility, content that is broadly accessible to all classes of users, and optimized accessibility. For example, as I said earlier on, if I'm a blind user, I may just be interested in audio-only books, not so much about the text. This also applies to Braille-only documents or sign language video for the deaf. Alex mentioned this earlier on in passing, EPUB 3 multiple renditions. This is an interesting approach. The idea is to combine within the same EPUB publication multiple renditions or multiple modalities of the same content. So you may, for example, find an EPUB that contains a Braille-optimized version as well as an audiobook, as well as just a regular text version of that same publication. At this stage, it's experimental. The spec is there. There's not a lot of content available in that form, but it's definitely an approach that's worth considering. Well, there's a lot more I would have liked to talk about, but we're getting towards the end of my time now. So hopefully this presentation opened your appetite. In this last slide, I will just mention W3C portable web publications to highlight the fact that the W3C, which is in charge of the Open Web platform, in the same way that IDPF is taking care of the publication formats, PWP is a window on a potential future for what publications on the web and offline should be like. There's a publishing interest, a digital publishing interest group. Area semantics on the web are being considered as a replacement for EPUB-specific constructs that are used to structure documents. Metadata is critical in the publishing world, so schema.org defines accessibility metadata this is again work in progress, so I invite you to visit the links in this slide. And there's really a lot more I would like to talk about. So what I suggest is we don't have time for questions, but I'll be participating at the workshop later this afternoon, so I will welcome any of your questions then. Thank you.